so a small meeting tonight. Thank you guys for coming. Some of you are on the Diddy Bag email list for sustainable living, and some of you are on Rise of Mystic, and then maybe members of the public. But if you're here for the Inflation Reduction Act and how it pertains to climate change and how it's going to help inform us as to our next steps, then you are in the right place. So again, small meeting today. Before we start, though, we have a lot of local candidates that are running for office who are very interested in combating climate change as part of their agenda, and so they're really busy. And they're coming and going all the time. So sometimes I'll just sort of stop what I'm doing and I'll bring up a candidate for office who may want to speak on climate change or let us know how their campaign is going. So hopefully that's okay with everybody, because there's always a crossover between our, what we're trying to do in terms of fighting climate change and politics, right? I mean, those are our lawmakers who will end up making laws on climate change. So anyway, I wanted to bring up the candidate for the 18th senatorial district here, Farouk Rajab, who is running, and who is a progressive-minded candidate who cares very much about climate change and what's happening in the world. So I'll just introduce Farouk, and the floor is yours, sir. If you want to say a few words before you're off to your next thing. So well,
thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Farouk Rajab, and I'm the Democratic candidate for the 18th senatorial district, which covers Stonington, Groton, North Stonington, Voluntown, Preston, Griswold, Sterling, and Plainfield. I heard there's a test at the end of this. I'm by trade, I'm a hotelier. I worked in Groton for many years as the general manager of the Mystic Marriott, and currently the general manager of the Providence Marriott in Providence. I got passionate about politics about 6 years ago. I'm not going to say why 6 years ago, but I got passionate about politics 6 years ago. And I got more involved. And part of my involvement is currently I am the chair of the Board of Education in Stonington. I also sit on the Mystic River Boathouse Park Committee in Stonington. So if you're not familiar with the project, it's a great project on the east side of the Mystic River. Please look it up. I also, as in my previous life, worked for a company here out of Waterford called the Waterford Hotel Group. And I was in charge of their sustainability efforts, and that's back 15 years ago. And part of that initiative we had at the company, I was able to convert 27 hotels to get the green certification from the state of Connecticut through various efforts from, a better, light bulbs in the bathrooms to initiating the toiletries where we converted to household style toiletries in the showers and the bathrooms. So many initiatives, but so I've been involved in sustainability. I personally believe that we don't do enough in Connecticut for coastal resiliency and for open space, and to support also even initiatives, even as simple as electric, solar electric at homes. I wanted to introduce myself real quick to you, give you a quick update. We are campaigning. We're knocking on doors. That's really what most of us do, is try to get to introduce ourselves to you by coming, visiting you at home, sometimes via digital, sometimes via signage. Everybody laughs at my car now because it says my name everywhere. I'm just driving around town, and it's all about trying to introduce ourselves to you. And we come to meetings like this, and one of Jason was referring to, we're all jumping on a call, to introduce ourselves also to some of the people who are interested in election and voting. So that's really the very quick summary about myself. I'm very open to asking questions. I'm also very open if you're interested in being part of our campaign. I see familiar faces and friends in the room, but we have, if you can come knock on doors with us, you can invite us to your backyard for your barbecue. I don't eat a lot, so don't worry about that part. We also have sign-up sheets in the back if you're interested in phone banking with us, which is making phone calls to your friends. If you don't want to do any of that and you just want write 10 postcards and send them to your friends, encourage them to come out and vote. Voting is the only privilege we have as Americans that differentiate us and anybody who's living in our country. So please come out and vote. It's a privilege to have that right to vote. Anybody has any questions for me? Because I can babble for hours, and this is not my meeting, so I don't want to hijack it. No questions? Yes, ma'am.
What would you say is the focal point of the environmental and climate change aspect of the bill?
I don't want to dive into the bill, to be honest with you, but there's ways that for us as a state to take initiatives beyond the federal level initiatives. In Connecticut, there are no way, like if you decide, like look at the difference between us and California when it comes to sustainability and efforts, encouraging people to drive electric car or have renewable energy sources that are sustainable and they are less impactful on the environment. We have a nuclear plant here nearby, right, that produce electricity. I'm not saying dump it tomorrow, but there are ways for us to become more green about our energy. And there's more ways for us to do more sustainable things for our shoreline. We're struggling, and I've never seen the seaport flood. And in 22 years, I lived in Stonington until last year. And it was a really bad situation at the Mystic Seaport, where the water rose into the shops and into the seaport itself. I mean, some of you lived here longer than me, longer than 22 years. So if that happens more often, please inform me. But we have partners on the federal level. Congressman Courtney has been a voice of reason. Senator Blumenthal and Chris Murphy have been fighters for sustainability. I really believe that, and they've done a good work on the federal level. Now we need to translate it more into our state, and that's where we come in. People running for House and Senate, that's our role really, is to make those initiatives on the federal level translate into the state initiatives.
So I forgot to introduce myself sometimes. I skip some of those. It's been a while. But my name is Jason Hine, and I own a little sustainability shop called the Ditty Bag. And that's another story, the name of the store. But really, what we try to do is do all we can to fight climate change and reduce plastic use. And so this is one of the free things that we try to offer because I didn't want to just sell stuff all day. I also wanted to influence our legislators, our lawmakers, and educate myself and the public. I mean, we have all a lot to learn in this ever-changing world. So again, Jason Hine, if you have any questions. And thanks, Farouk, again, very much. So when the candidates come here, it's an opportunity for people to network. We don't know who's going to win. So if you shake hands and connect with all the candidates, and perhaps if any of the legislators themselves drop by today, it's good for all of us. We should know our legislators. I mean, we should know who they are, but they should know us. When they walk in a room, when we walk in a room, they should know our names. Then you're on the right track. So that's why I always invite them, and they often come. But we really should know them if we're going to make some change. So thanks again, Farouk. And then we have some other candidates that I'll probably speak in a little while. But there are a series of campaign things going on tonight. Okay, so I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news. What do you want to hear first?
Bad.
You want to hear the bad news? Okay. So here's the bad news. Our guest speaker tonight, Roger Coons, is in California. He's fine. His wife is fine. Family emergency. Last minute, he emailed me and said, "Hey, Jay, I hope it's not a problem, but you're going to have to run the PowerPoint presentation." Here's the good news. So the bad news is no Roger. The good news is I do have some experience giving presentations. I once did a presentation called Skyscrapers and Other Big Buildings. I was younger, I was 8, but I think it came off really good. So I feel very But anyway, so a lot of this information comes from Roger, and as I did my homework on the Inflation Reduction Act, I learned a couple of things. One is I have way more to learn. This is a big package. This is a huge, multi-billion, hundreds of billions of dollars going in, going out, and it is massive. We're going to focus on climate change piece of it, but we're just really beginning to understand what this means for our nation and what it means for us. If it only means something at the national level, there's no reason for us to be. I actually think there's a lot for us to do in this room, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Our code word is next slide. That means we got this all worked out. So I didn't, so there's a few things. So it used to be called the Build Back Better Act.
Jason, you turn on some lights.
Could you turn
Yeah.
down?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't want to scare anybody. Is that, you want more? Is that?
That's perfect.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, thank you very much for putting that. So it used to be called the Build Back Better Act. However, it's been reduced and reworked, as most acts and bills are, as they go through those series of processes that they have to go in order to come and end up on the president's desk. So that's pretty normal. So that doesn't surprise me at all. Overall, it reduces the deficit, lowers prescription drug prices, massive level over the next 5 to 10 years, invests in domestic energy production, modernizes and expands the IRS, which for some of you may be a little nervous about that, increases the tax rate for companies over $1 billion, so that large corporations and companies pay their fair share. And this last piece that's highlighted is what we're going to focus on. It addresses the domestic energy security and climate change. This is what we should be optimistic about. There's about $370 billion geared for climate change. And I do think, after reading all the critiques and the summaries, that this is a reason to be very optimistic at this point. Now we can point to not just plans or goals, but actual money coming our way to combat climate change. So I actually think this is a really good time, and a really good start. It's also historic. America has never spent that much money, ever, on climate change. This is brand new. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so there's a couple of things that we just wanted people to know about. So it does lower energy costs for citizens. It expands, I'm just going to read through these. It expands access to clean energy by making clean energy tax credits more accessible. And it extends them for over 10 years. It does create jobs. There's $60 billion going into jobs for manufacturing solar panels, batteries, and other clean energy technologies. This is a boost that industry needed. It's really hard for the clean energy industry to compete with fossil fuels when they've been in the business for so long and when they don't really pay their fair share. So this boost is really important. Providing funding for low-income families to electrify their homes, including $9 billion in home energy rebate programs. And this is where you got to do your own homework. But particularly for low-income families, we want to make sure that low-income families know and understand that there are savings to be had as they make repairs, they replace appliances and they're energy efficient, if they end up deciding to go solar, whatever it is, there's lots of money for low-income communities in this act. And finally, my friends at Earthlight will tell you they've been fighting for a long time to remove some of the barriers to community solar and even just individuals purchasing solar panels. So there's a lot of removing of those barriers, and it makes it more affordable for the average person. We'll take a look at that a little bit more coming up next. So you may know this, transportation is the reason for the most carbon getting pumped into the air. So every time you sit in traffic, that's what's happening. All those cars, often one person in the car, all that gas being consumed as you sit there in traffic, not making any progress. But what's happening is that CO2 is just getting pumped into the air. And so this is one of the biggest reasons that we have climate change accelerating at the rate that it is. So government can oversee, or does oversee, the U.S. Postal Service. So $3 billion to electrify the fleet of approximately 217,000 vehicles, which is, by the way, the largest government fleet in the nation. So that's pretty significant. There's $1 billion for clean school and transit buses, garbage trucks, other heavy-duty vehicles, prioritizing those communities that are more adversely affected by climate change. $3 billion to clean up air pollution at ports. This may affect us. It's really a lot of that money is geared towards like the Gulf Coast. By installing zero emissions equipment and technology, most of the funds going into portside communities that are breathing disproportionately high levels of toxic air pollution. And finally, tax credits for electric vehicles. If you wanted an electric vehicle, either new or used, there will be rebates and tax credits for those vehicles coming up real soon. Actually, if it was made in North America, if the car was fully made from beginning to end in North America as an electric car, those kick in now. So you don't even have to wait. Imported cars are going to take a little, I think 2023 is when they start to go into effect. All right, next, Chris. Yep.
If we ask questions now, or do you want them at the end?
You can go for it, but here's the bad news. I'm not Roger,
Oh, no.
but I will do my best. But go for it.
It had to do with Connecticut having a school bus, electric school bus that caught on fire sitting in a parking lot, or maybe it wasn't a school bus, but one of the bus fleets, of the mass transit fleet. So they put a ban on us buying any more electric buses. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not. That's a great question, and I will see if we can address that at the next one. I can't imagine that's going to last very long, but I don't know. Good question. And please don't be afraid to ask questions. I'll either answer them because I'll know the answer, or I'll just make something up and you probably won't know. Anyway, so this was a lot of folks' concern going into this. I mean, I was really lucky and I got to meet with the governor a couple months ago with folks from Hartford and New Haven, mostly minority, young people that were representing those cities. And so there were only a panel of 6 of us talking about climate change with the governor. And, one of the young women said to the governor, I really appreciate that the electric grid is going to be more efficient. I really appreciate rebates that are coming on electric cars, but I'm never going to own an electric car. It's just not going to happen. It's just not the kind of money I'm going to ever make or see. I take the bus. I always have and I always will. Can you do something about the buses? But that's when it really hit me hard, that if all we talk about is electric vehicles, all we talk about is the grid and how we can save it, then we're not going to bring everyone together on this issue. So I've been really trying to pay more attention to what this bill means for low-income communities and communities of color. $315 million for air monitoring, so that people can say now, for sure, here's what's in our air in Detroit, for example. Here's what's in our air in New Orleans. So that kind of monitoring is really important. It doesn't sound like a lot of money in this huge bill, but it is. Because then those low-income communities will know exactly what's in the air they breathe, and specific funds for schools and those living near polluting industries. $3 billion for community-led projects in areas experiencing disproportionate impacts of pollution and climate change. And the reinstatement of the Superfund tax. And that way, those industries are taxed that are going to eventually be responsible for the cleanup. So that we're not, because we didn't make the mess, but they are. So the Superfund tax will come back into being. So all these are really, there are quite a few components in the Inflation Reduction Act that do deal with communities of color, low-income communities, that I think are really positive. But again, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. All right, let's see, next slide. Making industrial farms more climate friendly. Many of them are not, for a variety of reasons. But they're going to put more than $20 billion to help farmers and ranchers shift to sustainable practices, like crop rotation and cover crops. And then $300 million for research into the climate impact of agricultural practices. The agricultural sector of our economy does negatively impact climate change, and so this is going to help address some of those. Yeah.
Could you make the connection between economic inflation and sustainability? There's a lot of spending going on.
Yes.
But will it produce revenues to
Yeah,
sustain that spending?
that's a great question. So the part of the bill that we're talking about now is mostly the spending piece. There are revenue making pieces of the act in other sections I'm not really talking about today, such as the tax rates on the $1 billion companies and over. So there definitely are, and there are definitely deficit reduction items in the money making part of the act. Whereas really we're focusing on the spending piece, right? So don't get too concerned that I'm only talking. In fact, if you look at the whole bill, you know, it's, they're talking about saving $700 billion, but spending $370 million. So when you add it all up and subtract it all, you end up having extra money that will go towards the deficit. So the entire package is less spending and more money generating, if that answers your question. The one thing about the Inflation Reduction Act that it does not do a very good job of is reducing the inflation. I hate to say it, but when you look at this in its entirety, these are programs that are laid out over the next 5-10 years. Many of the spending is happening now. And that may or may not affect inflation the way we hope it will right now. So even though it's called the Inflation Reduction Act, it's the one piece that's probably not going to be noticeable for a long time. So interesting that they branded it that. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
Yes and no.
I have lots of ways to duck good questions. So that's just one technique. All right, next, Chris. All right, restoring oceans and forests. So, as I'm sure you know, the oceans and forests already have natural ways of sequestering all that CO2. And so, if you just let a tree grow, you're fighting climate change. So, there's a lot of money in this act to make sure that we foster that growth and development. So, $50 million to advance protections for mature and old growth forests. $2.6 billion in coastal resilience grants. That will affect communities like ours, including by state and tribal governments, to protect and restore coastal communities and ecosystems. And we won't get into how much the sea levels may rise and how much it may affect our communities. I suspect that we're way off. I keep hearing about these shelves that they drop into the water at any time, in which case we're going to go up 20 inches, like that. So things like that scare me. So coastal resilience is something we should be on now. I know a lot of towns around here already are. $250 million to implement endangered species recovery plans and address change impacts on key habitats. One of the things that got me interested in climate change a few years ago were really, really hit me. So I was reading, some of you may have heard this story, I was reading National Geographic, and the species I was reading about was coral reef systems. And I love National Geographic. It's been around for, 100 plus years. And in 2018, it came out with an article about the coral reef systems in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef. And I started to read it. Who doesn't love to see those coral reefs with all those fish, right? So I always just love National Geographic photographs. And so I opened to the page, and right away I got to the piece where half of the Great Barrier Reef is already dead. And I was like shocked. Sometimes you read something and you are shocked, and I was truly, it just hit me. So when I read something like this, $250 million to protect endangered species, I'm worried about these coral reefs because for a number of reasons, the water absorbs that heat, that global warming, much faster. It's more dense, it's much faster. More of that global warming is occurring in the water. And coral reefs are animals that can't move, so it's like giving them a fever, and they can't move, right? Lobsters, we all know, if you sail or boat in Long Island Sound, it used to be full of lobster traps, not so much anymore, right? Because they're gone, kind of head north to cooler waters. Coral reefs can't do that. That makes us nervous. So I hope that's enough. $1 billion to ensure federal agencies can conduct robust environmental reviews and public engagement on large projects using federal funds or on federal lands. All right, and next. What it means for us is one more idea of things that we should all just be thinking about in our own lives. A lot of these acts come out and we think, oh, that's great for climate change. but it's inviting the citizens to be involved in this, which is really cool. So a 30% tax credit for installing residential solar panels. So if you've been thinking about solar panels and you put it off, good, because this is actually good. For those of you that put things off, and you're going to be rewarded for putting that off. That's huge. I put it off, so I'm pretty glad about that now. But that's important. I mean, that makes solar panels much more accessible. And this would be the one little marketing pitch for my store. We partnered with Earthlight. They install solar panels, and they're awesome. And Roger Coons, if he were here, he would tell you they're awesome because he had Earthlight install his solar panels on his home in Groton. And he loves them. And a couple of customers have come through my store, purchased solar panels through our store, through Earthlight, and gave them an A+ rating. So if you're looking to get started, yeah, definitely go out there and get lots of quotes. But know that you can start with us too. And we'll hook you up with somebody who can get you started with a free quote and help you navigate some of these rebates and discounts that are now coming through. Up to $7,500 for purchasing an electric vehicle. For lower income folks who are going to buy used, perhaps, there are still rebates for used cars too. There will be up to maybe $4,000 for used cars. So there's rebates out there. They're not all listed here, but just know that they're coming. Up to $14,000 for home energy efficiency upgrades, including up to $8,000 to install a heat pump. Well, a heat pump, I didn't know much about heat pumps. They're kind of like ACs. Doesn't sound like it, but they can do heat and cooling systems, and they're much more efficient than your standard air conditioning unit. Something to look into. So for your homework, if you don't have a heat pump or you never really use one, or you still got those old ACs that like we have, look into heat pumps. Now might be a really good time to save some money on upgrading and becoming much more efficient in your own homes. And finally, making these changes could help save families $1,800 a year on energy bills and making their costs more stable and predictable compared to the volatile fossil fuel prices, right, which you've seen, right, with your recent oil bills last year. I know you all have. I have too. I got our first few oil bills, and glad I was sitting down when I did. All right, next slide, and then this is where we're going to change gears. We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Chris. All right, our concerns. Hence the word concerns. Okay, Chris, go. So these are the things that we're going to watch out for. And now, so for those of you that are sort of like, I like to try to keep hammering away at why we're all here today. It's not just to learn about what's out there, but the other thing we're going to do is we're going to have another meeting probably in October, maybe one November, December, we're kind of hammering out the time. But what we want to do is, now that we know what's out there, and now that we have reasons to be optimistic and reasons to be involved, we want to work on actual legislation with our legislators to make sure that we're doing our part in pushing for even better statewide rules. So, because they're very accessible to us. I mean, you just heard from a candidate for our Senate district right here, and there'll be others. So they come to our meetings all the time, and they're very easy to talk to and to reach out to. So for that reason, we want to make sure that we can come together and push for some of these things that we think make sense. So the Inflation Reduction Act also invests in fossil fuels. We can thank Joe Manchin for this from West Virginia. I'm sure many of you know who he is. If you don't, he's a senator from West Virginia, coal country, and he's done everything he can to protect the fossil fuel industry. The only way this bill would have passed, and the only way, is if he got some things that he wanted. And in West Virginia, he wanted to make sure that he got a gas pipeline, and among some other protections for the fossil fuel industry. So these are very specific to Joe Manchin's requests and demands. So the Inflation Reduction Act also does subsidize the building of new pipelines. It's not what we consider sustainable. Guarantees the leasing of oil and gas drilling. You all are well aware that is not what we are looking for, but it's in the package. It was the only way the package was going to get through. And $12 billion for carbon capture and removal. Now here's an interesting one. Sounds good though, right? It's carbon capture. I mean, technology, that's really good actually. And I was talking to a friend recently about jobs in that field where you might learn more about capturing carbon and putting it into the ground directly. Really cool stuff. But the reason Manchin wants it is because if the fossil fuel companies can have those technologies, they don't have to stop drilling. They can simply say, well, it's okay that we're still using coal. It's okay that we're using gas and oil because we've got these, or we're looking into these carbon capture technologies. It's a way for them to argue for longer life. So that's why a lot of us are very weary of that last one. And I had a quote here. Let's see if I print it out. So it says, yeah, this came from NPR. It was a show on NPR. Quote, we are sitting right now with a lot of contradictions. While the bill does designate some funding for disadvantaged communities, it also subsidizing fossil fuels, said Huan Chung, the climate director at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. Quote, it feels like the bill is giving with one hand and taking away with the other. For example, he says the new law could pay for air monitoring in southwest Detroit, where he lives, and where industrial air pollution makes people sick. But at the same time, the law invests in the fossil fuel industry, which can help those industrial facilities operate for decades to come. Right? Doesn't make much sense. It's kind of strange. But that's part of what is in the Inflation Reduction Act.
I just wanted to ask you, I remember when they came up with this deal for Joe Manchin, but I thought it was only for the one pipeline going into West Virginia. Are you talking about pipelines all over the place?
Not necessarily, but there are drilling opportunities that he's fought for. So, for example, I know the Gulf region in Louisiana, he fought for some drilling there, and also in Alaska. So there are parts of the country that are now will see investments in drilling, for example. And I don't know if it's for oil or for gas or both. But so it's not just West Virginia. That's right. Yeah. Okay, next, Chris. By the way, Chris Johnson is the tech guy. I don't want you thinking he's just putting the advanced button. There's a lot more to it. He just makes it look really, really easy. So again, we just kind of touched upon this, but most of the polluting industries are where low-income communities exist. So this is a concern. This is something we just have to keep pushing for. Next. What about helping small organic farms? This was my question when I was reading through it. There's a lot of money going to those huge industrialized farms where the money's going to help them go green, right? It's going to help them become more sustainable. We have a lot of organic farms right here in Connecticut that made that decision long ago. So they've been operating sustainably and responsibly for years, in some cases for generations. I want to make sure they get money. For those of you that don't know, southeastern Connecticut has just gone through a very serious drought. It maybe affected you and your lawns, or maybe it affected you in a greater way. But I can tell you just north of here are farms, and they're not selling vegetables anymore because they don't have enough. They didn't get enough rain. I saw videos in southeastern Connecticut of people walking through in between the rows of vegetables and the puffs of dust come up. And it was really sad and scary because I know some of these farmers. They're friends, and their farms are in big trouble. So I would love to see at the state level. This is something we can push for at our next meeting or the one after that. I don't know if there's going to be a farm bill or something to protect southeastern organic farms from the consequences of drought. And we've already seen that. So that's my question. And another reason why we should all come together again for another meeting. Kind of bring it down to Connecticut next time. All right, next. There's no carbon tax or fee. So here's what Roger Coons is a big proponent of. Taxing carbon, taxing fossil fuels at their source. So when they extract it from the ground or it comes into the United States, right then and there you tax it. Understanding that it's going to end up as CO2. You tax it right there. If you tax carbon at its source, that's when the fossil fuel companies would say, we got to phase out. That's the only thing. That everything else is after the fact. And so I wish Roger was here because he would tell you all about his efforts for decades. And they were really close to passing a carbon fee and dividend at the national level, but it just didn't go through. But we can push for it at the state level. We can push for the state of Connecticut to recognize and formally support such an act at the federal level. That helps. All right, next phrase. We have not yet declared a climate emergency. We're still acting like it's not. Roger Coombs, if he were here tonight, would also tell you that if we declare an emergency, it opens us to funds. It gives us access to funds that we don't otherwise have. If we can go to the national government and say, we need this money, we've declared an emergency, then it's different. It's different. So declaring an official emergency. Some people are scared of that language. Oh, emergency. I don't know if it's really an emergency. And I've had this conversation with people too. Even people that are concerned about climate. They're like, well, I don't know if it's really considered an emergency. And that's because a geologic, earth-wide emergency just looks different than like a fire. But if it was a fire and you knew it was an emergency, you would do something. You wouldn't have, half of the Groton Public Library was on fire right now. We wouldn't put together a committee to talk about it, consider our next steps. We'd exit the building, right? We see that kind of emergency. But a geological emergency doesn't feel the same. We don't see it. We see it, but a little bit here and there, it's confusing. It's overwhelming. Not everybody understands it the same way. And that's why I think the state and our leadership need to declare an emergency, so folks will follow.
What's the downside of declaring it?
Well, I think so. I'm not a lawmaker, but I would think the downside would be, this is just me, what I think, is that sometimes if you use language that another side, right, let's say climate deniers, they may shut down and say, oh, see, you've gone too far. It's not an emergency. Come on. You know what? We don't even need. Like, we're just too far off the topic. I mean, if you use words and you want to vote on something that said this is an emergency, if the other side, you can lose people that way too. It may sound too extreme. I think we're way past that, but it's just me. But I think that's partly why. I'll bet there's more to it than I just. Okay, let's see. Next. Thank you, Chris. How can Connecticut better help sustainable businesses? I think we just got to make sure that Governor Lamont, should he win the next election, which is looking very good at this time, what else can he do to promote small businesses? I think I've seen some recent statistics that say a lot of young people are moving to Connecticut. It's a really good thing. Just make sure they have jobs in the sustainability role. Actually, somebody who's working very closely with Roger was a high school student. He's working on a bill called the Sustainable Business Incubator. I think that's the one. No, I'm sorry, that's not the one. Not sure. I'll come back to that. Okay, next, Chris. Well, okay, this is the one. What can we do to get off plastic? Obviously, I'm trying to help people at the community level get off of plastic. We don't need it anymore. I always tell my customers, you know what? We've got a lot of plastic bottles. We've got a lot of plastic containers. We've done a great job making plastic stuff. Let's pat ourselves on the back and find something else to do. Because we're good. We got plenty. Let's just use the ones we got. So I'm a big proponent of reusing. Recycling does not work. I know there's folks out there that wholeheartedly believe that we need to spend a lot of time working on recycling. I don't believe that anymore. Most things are not recycled. Just not true. Those little numbers at the bottom, it's got to be a 1, 2, or a 5. And if it is, it may get recycled. The others do not. And if it gets recycled, it only gets recycled once. And it gets a new number, and it doesn't get recycled again. It's just kind of crazy that we're all about recycling, and we don't recycle. So we have to reduce. And so he's working with a high school student on alternatives to plastics bill. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks, Jason. Is there any enforcement of recycling at the pickup and drop-off levels? And what kind of numbers? Is this something you've researched or seen in action?
I haven't seen any enforcement of it. I don't know. My sense is that our state is overwhelmed with the amount of plastic, and our nation is overwhelmed with it. I don't think that was. I don't even know where we're going. I mean, I think they're just at this point, Connecticut's going to start shipping out most of its recycling, which means it won't get recycled. It'll probably get buried. If you see pictures of those prairie lands, those fields, with the pipes sticking out, it's a let the methane come out, or under the burning everything. So no, I think it's kind of a fiasco. Kind of a fiasco.
Part of it's because there's no market anymore.
That's right.
The recyclers used to get money for it, now there's no market, they can't sell it. So,
Yeah, we've just got to get off it. I mean, fast. And sometimes you need laws to help people make that shift a lot faster. I know a lot of people say, well, we'll all make our individual choices. Well, that's too slow. It's too slow. Sometimes regulation's okay. It just speeds things up a bit. All right, next, Chris. Okay, that's it. So that kind of concludes Roger's piece through me. I don't know, can we get the lights, Chris?
Yes.
And I really wish I could be here, and I wish Roger could be here to give you a much better Q&A kind of piece to the story, because he's a climate scientist. I'm just a small business owner. But are there any questions that I might be able to? Yeah.
I was expecting to hear about skyscrapers and tall buildings. This was really good.
Well, thank
You
you.
did a great job.
Thank you.
Maybe next time.
I may do that one again, Peter, just because sometimes it feels good. You got to do it again. Yeah, thank you. So what we want to do now is I want to end by saying what our plan is. And so I'm really, really, really thankful that you showed up. And I really, really hope that you keep an eye out for our next meeting. Because our next meeting, I even think we'll be at tables next time. And what we'll do is we'll start to hash out some of the things that we can push for at the state level, like very specific items. And we're going to ask our local legislators for help on that. Because they know what's going to pass or not. I mean, I can sit here and say, we need to do this. And they're going to be like, never going to pass. Never going to pass. Let's not have this conversation. So to have legislators here help us do that is just really, really important. So that's why I'm thankful that we have candidates and we do have some legislators here. I want to give them a chance to speak too. But know that we're going to be calling on them real soon. So I see a bunch of y'all. Who should go first? Does anybody have a meeting pressing? Well, then I'd like to start with Representative Christine Connolly, who has been a staunch ally. Well, I'll say Representative Connolly's been a staunch ally on a number of just really sensible, meaningful pieces of legislation. But on the issue of climate change, she's an ally, I can tell you that. She's very accessible, and if you don't know her and you're in her district, please get to know her. But it's the floor is yours.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone. I know a few of us were a little tardy because we had other meetings, and it's nice to have an in-person meeting and to get off the Zoom for like one part of my day. So thank you for having an in-person meeting. I think the presentation I saw, last half, it was great. In the work that our federal government has done this year to help with the climate is amazing. But don't forget, we did a lot in the state too. We did SB4, which is the Clean Air Act. And as we're getting close to elections, just to be crystal clear, Clean Air Act, which is important to have clean air, was not a bipartisan bill. It passed, Democrats voted yes, Republicans voted no. Ask them if they're coming to your door asking for your vote. And our current senator here did not vote in the Senate day. She was not there. She voted no in committee, in Transportation Committee. I sat with her. I voted yes twice, once in committee, once on the floor. Double yeses for me. And our senator voted no. I hope that our new candidates will vote yes and that we get more folks to vote for the Clean Air Act and other really important legislation. The bill was good, and the reason that folks voted no is they said it costs too much money. Well, it does. It does cost money. It costs money to invest in things such as electric buses for our state, electric buses for our students. It costs money to improve our train system. It costs money to have all these great improvements. They do not come for free. They cost money, of course, and the state and the federal government have to make investments. If we keep doing what we're doing, we will end up underwater where we are now, and we will end up with no earth to be in, and that's the problem. So we do need to invest. Otherwise, we have no hope. So we don't really have an option in my mind. We have to invest in better air, clean water we have to invest in. If we don't have water, we have a big problem. If we don't have a home on our earth that is safe for us, we have a huge problem. We don't have a place to live. So we should have acted 30, 40 years ago, and many of you have been trying to act 30 and 40 years ago, but we certainly cannot pass the buck down another 30, 40 years because we've run out of time. So it's time to invest. It's time to do what's right. It's time to make our world better for children. It's time to deal with asthma rates. It's time to deal with cancer rates. It's time to make things better. And it does cost money. And anyone who tells you, I don't want to spend the money, they're never going to help. We have to make it better. So hopefully folks will ask people who are on the record. If you're an incumbent, you're on the record, you voted yes or no. In my mind, there's no excuse for clean air. There's no excuse for clean water. There's no excuse for certain things. Stand up and say, I think it's a good investment. And the new candidates, I hope they support it. I hope they get in office and support it. And when we talk about, we will be able to put bills in, hopefully in December. They'll open up the computer system, and folks will talk about that more after elections. But they open up the computer system, any rep or senator can put in any idea they wish. So if you have ideas, the sooner you get it to us, the easier it is for us to be ready to go to put it in the computer system for bill ideas so that they load up. I like when environmental committee is loaded up with ideas and has to make so many public hearings that they run out of time because there's so many great ideas to do. So we want to load them up. We want to give them plenty of opportunity to have public hearings, plenty of opportunity for people to have their voices heard, plenty of opportunities for some good legislation to pass. And we will be going from January to June this year, or 2023. It's long session, so bills will be making out of committee probably in March, late March, early April. They make it out of committee, and then they have to make it through the House and the Senate by the first Wednesday in June at midnight. And then the governor signs them or vetoes them. So it's very important who our governor is, because the governor only has one ability to do, is veto a bill. If they don't sign it, it gets automatically approved. If the governor is not supportive of climate change, well, they can veto it, and we have to override by 2/3 of the House and the Senate, which, if we have 2/3 majority, that's wonderful. The closer we are to not having majority, or to not the 2/3, the supermajority, the harder it is to get to override the vetoes. And people can count. It's not that hard. There's 151 of us in the House. There's 36 in the Senate. It's pretty easy to count those up and see who your 51% is and who your 2/3 are. So the more good people we have, the better it is for folks. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so I'll say it again, your homework, if you haven't already done it, one of the things you can do, connect with your local representative. It doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. First of all, if they're in office, they need to hear from you, no matter who they are. They have to hear from you. They have to have the pressure on them either way. But if we have an opportunity to put progressive-minded candidates into positions where they can go to Hartford and actually vote on laws, it's really important. So your second assignment, if you've got time, is to back and support candidates who care about this and who show up to meetings like this. So we could visit a bunch, but since you referenced the governor, we do have somebody here, Nikki, who is working with the governor actually right now. So maybe come on down and introduce yourself.
I'm Nikki Neifeld. Yes, I'm working in the Groton area, Stonington area, Rudyard area for the re-election campaign for the governor. And I love that Chris Conley brought up the Connecticut Clean Air Act. The governor just said that he was going to invest $5.4 billion into that just recently. So we are continually going and pushing for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a Public Act 2022 and through 25, and that's going to help reduce emissions from the transportation sector, and there's going to be more stringent emission standards. So I know on the state level, the governor is doing what he can with the legislation to get passed. So I'm here. Our team is out. You're probably seeing us knocking on doors in the Groton area, New London area, all of that stuff. If you're willing to work with us to get him reelected, be great. I know I'm going to be starting phone banking as well, so if that is something you are interested in, contacting the Groton DTC, contacting me, we can get that ready for you. But yeah, the governor is on board with this climate crisis. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, what's your background? How did you get involved in this?
Okay, so I am from Richmond, Virginia. I was a teacher for 15 years, and not to be a downer, but I had 6 kids either commit murder, be murdered, or die of suicide. And I said I need to do something more. And so I came up to the great state of Connecticut to work for a governor who believes in gun violence prevention. And so that's why I'm here.
Before I got involved and was really paying attention, whenever somebody knocked on my door and it was one of those cancers, I used to say things like, "Go away, leave me alone, watching TV," even if I wasn't, because I didn't want to be bothered. But now it's very different. I want to have these conversations with people. So make sure you open the doors and tell your neighbors too. Hear what they have to say, because we need to know who's out there. And people may win who we don't need to win if we're not paying attention and helping where we can. So I will say this, I don't usually say, I usually try to avoid politics, particularly when it's close to my business, but sometimes I have to. But I've been really disappointed in my legislator, Greg Howard in my district, because every time I've written a letter or an email asking for his support on a climate initiative, he said, no thanks, I can't. It doesn't make sense to me. And I've just been really disappointed. And so I would like to see a progressive-minded candidate in Stonington go to Hartford and pass laws, actually pass and vote with Christine Conley, go up as a team member, as opposed to somebody who's going to go and oppose everything that we ask for in terms of climate change. So I'd like to bring up Ashley Galeese, who's currently a candidate for
I'm going to apologize. I missed most of your presentation tonight because I did run from another meeting. I'm Ashley Galeese. I am running in the 43rd, which is a newly drawn district, so I am running against an incumbent right now. But Pawcatuck, Old Mystic, north of 95 in Stonington, all of North Stonington, and Eastern Ledger. So it is a newly worked out district, so I am running against him. When we talk about climate change, we talk about we look outside and we see this beauty around us, right? I was just in another meeting discussing this, of one of the things I love about living here is we have so much open space, we have green, we have all of this going on. And we've had an official up in Hartford for the past couple of years that if it comes against voting against his caucus or voting for what's right, he's going to go with his caucus every time. And that is what he proved. That was something, when we talk Clean Air Act, where he chose to go along with his party and not along with his constituents. So we are very different. I just love being outside. I love hiking. I'm an avid camper with my son. So when we talk about environmental issues, they mean a lot to me from a personal level and on a political level. So I'm really hoping to be able to go to Hartford and take some of that energy that I have and bring it up there with me. I have not served in the legislature before, but I've been working in politics for about 16 years on and off between different campaigns or serving on different committees and things of that nature. So I'm not a newcomer per se. I first got involved when I was 18 with MoveOn.org and was an organizer with them for multiple years. So I did focus a lot on environmental and anti-war in the beginning stages of my political career.
So again, we have yet another candidate from this area who is running in most of Groton. I don't know if it reaches some of the other towns. Currently, his campaign is focused on what he calls the 5 E's, which I thought was a lot. But actually, his earlier campaign was the 27 E's, and we said that's too many E's. That's not okay. So he's knocked it down. He's got it down to about 5 now. We feel pretty good about that. But Andre Bumgarner, if you would come down.
Thank you.
Sir.
In fact, running to be your state representative as well. I failed to mention, the district now includes the southwestern corner of Stonington. We no longer have a share edition with New London. They're in great hands with Representative Conley. But the 41st district consists of the southern half of Groton, from the city of Groton all the way to Mystic, and now from the Stonington side of Mystic all the way to the borough. And we've been hard out every day knocking doors, meeting voters at their doorstep, listening to their concerns. And I've had the privilege of representing the 41st district before, from 2015 to 2017, and in the last 5 years have served on the Groton Town Council. I am the endorsed Democratic nominee, so I'll be on the ballot this November, as well as endorsed by the Working Families Party, so I'll be on the ballot twice. But as Jason mentioned, focus on the 5 E's, but most significant, I think the most significant E is environmental quality. Our commitment to ensure that our open spaces are protected, that our future generations have the ability to survive. And I do worry in my lifetime, my grandchildren will live in a world where that is not guaranteed. And so every day, each and every one of us have to do our part, whether it's advocacy in our town council, at the state capitol, in the US Capitol, ensuring that we reduce our carbon emissions, that we protect our open spaces, that we preserve and protect our coastlines, our flora and fauna that are under threat, and most importantly, ensure that we decarbonize our energy sector, that we invest in our transportation system, in a sustainable transportation system, investing in our rail, investing in electric buses, as Representative Conley stated. Just on the town council, this year and over the last few years, we've secured funds to purchase the Wolfbrook property, which is a 150-plus acre property in the center of Mystic, which will be the largest open space acquisition that Groton has made in several decades. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud. Sometimes you do have to be proud of your no votes. I was very proud to, one of the councilors, and the councilor to make the motion to essentially exit the data center proposal. As many in the room were right on the front lines, fighting the good fight to make sure that it wouldn't see the light of day, that data center wouldn't see the light of day. And if we were to construct the data centers, it would have exacerbated the issues that we're dealing with our climate. As data centers are gas guzzlers, they emit a significant number of carbon. They require diesel generators. They requires that developers clear cut forests that are homes to so many of our critters, and degrades our water quality. So Zell, in the back serves on our sustainability and resiliency committee, and I was proud to have supported that proposal, or supported the creation of the committee, and their work has really served as the blueprint for what, as a town, we should do to pursue really a green future. So, at the state level, ready to bring our experiences that we've formed here in Groton together up to the state level and advocate on your behalf. I've already been public in talking to the CT Examiner, shared that I would love to serve on the Energy and Environment Committee, so we can have representation for Southeastern Connecticut on a lot of these critical issues. And so here to be your advocate. If you ever need anything, obviously don't hesitate to reach out. I feel like I know a little over half this room pretty well anyway, so I know I'm preaching to the choir, and many of you have seen the work we've accomplished together, and hope we can continue doing so at the state level. So thank you for your time.
Would you be willing to let me speak? I'm also a candidate.
Oh, I apologize for not knowing that. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on.
My name is Kevin Blacker. It's nice to meet you. Run on the Green Party line for the 2nd Congressional District against Joe Courtney and Mike France. Wasn't aware we'd be able to speak, but appreciate the opportunity. So climate change is something that I'm very passionate about, very excited about. Greening climate change. Using innovative, common sense approaches to basically greet the challenge. I think it's an existential threat. It's exciting to hear that there's this potential for $370 billion, to use. And I think a lot of people will be looking on the bright side of all the good things that could come from it. I think that we should, it's real important that we're looking out for the problems, trying to engineer out unintended consequences of something that is well-intentioned. When our country built the highways, the federal highway system, it changed the history of our country. There was a lot of decisions that were made that nobody realized the bad, the unintended consequences. Cutting a city like New London in half, cutting all of our cities in half, and how unfair it was that the cities have to deal with so much of the high concentration of people have to deal with all the pollution. The people lost their houses, eminent domain, and that loss of wealth, how it was unfairly borne by people in the city. So, looking out for making mistakes of how we roll out our response to climate change. A couple that come to mind would be not, say, putting solar on farmland, not putting offshore wind on our productive fishing grounds, let me try to think of how to explain this. Locally at State Pier, in order to make offshore wind, which is a clean, a clean energy, we displaced it was our greatest transportation asset. We used to bring cargo into the area in bulk, 55,000 tons on a ship versus 20 tons on a truck, and we shut down the ability to use that transportation asset in order to have clean, renewable energy. And I think that if we think hard and we work together, we can have both, but that we need to spend the money efficiently. I have one question for you. Surveying the room, is there anybody from a newspaper here? That's all I have to say. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer.
What's your background in terms of experience in politics and or farming and fishing?
Let's see. So, grew up in Knowing, have a landscaping company with my father, and do some farming on the side. Got a degree in soil science from the University of New Hampshire. Got out of there in 2008. I guess the most political thing that I've done is led a years-long, effort to have access at State Pier for use. The state made it a single-use facility. Basically excluded the uses that had been there and locked out the access to agriculture and forestry. There's a couple federal investigations, Attorney General investigation ongoing as a result of the work that I've done in regards to State Pier. So I've worked very hard to get the truth out, and I guess that has been political.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've listened, point taken about the press for sure. On the flip side, you have to know that I have to deal with paparazzi all day, and it just gets tiring. So at some point I gotta. But at our next meeting, we'll see if we can. But I do want to say thank you to SEC TV all the time. Yeah, and they broadcast great things, and check them out. Check out their website.
SEC-TV.
SEC, you gotta put a dash in there or you'll get some weird stuff. I'm just gonna warn you right now. Stuff that you may or may not want coming up on your internet. But SEC-TV is the way to go. So before you leave, please connect with either myself or the candidates.